Welcome to Weather Extra. I'm First Alert Meteorologist Jillian Johnson. Here in Central Texas, we saw some crazy swings in our temperatures once again last week, but that's typically what happens this time of the year as we begin to switch from fall to winter. But up across the northeastern United States, they've already seen multiple rounds of snow and frigid temperatures this month, and winter hasn't even officially started yet. Here's a time lapse of blizzard-like conditions in Buffalo, New York this past Thursday. A lake-effect snowstorm brought up to 20 inches of snow, along with winds gusting as high as 40 miles per hour. Travel was extremely difficult with deep snow cover on roads and very poor visibility. Temperatures were also dangerously cold, dropping down to nearly 10 below zero with wind chill values around 20 below zero. While the heaviest snow fell around upstate New York last week, other parts of the Great Lakes states managed to get their own snowfall as well. Around 2.5 inches of snow was reported to have fallen on the west side of Cleveland, Ohio on Wednesday. Here's a view of one neighborhood in that area. We now turn to the other top weather story from the past week, heading out to the West Coast, where a devastating wildfire scorched thousands of acres in Southern California. The Franklin fire outside of Los Angeles at one point last week tripled in size in just 1 hour, scorching the equivalent of 5 football fields every minute. Maribel Gonzalez was in Malibu, California last week, where the fire forced many to evacuate.
California fire officials are working tirelessly to tame a blazing inferno. Southern California's infamous Santa Ana winds, coupled with low humidity, have created a wildfire that's threatening businesses and destroying homes.
Embers were flying everywhere. All this is on fire. And so we're basically just trying to keep everything wet, so when the embers land on it, they go out.
On Tuesday, there were approximately 18,000 people and 8,100 homes and businesses under evacuation orders or warnings, according to the Los Angeles County Sheriff.
Fire season is not a season. It's year-round in the state of California.
One woman in the evacuation zone says she awoke to a wall of flames and had to scramble to save animals.
I must have had like 30 minutes to run around and try to get the horses, and we didn't know what we were going to do. Like, we could not leave them in the barn. Thank God we didn't leave them in the barn because the barn burnt down.
Students sheltered in place for hours inside dormitories and libraries as flames blazed nearby.
Overall, the vibe was panic. A lot of people were taking time to pray, as we are a Christian campus.
I'm Maribel Gonzalez reporting.
November 30th marked the end to the Atlantic hurricane season, and what an active season it was. For a recap of what we saw this year, we bring in First Alert meteorologist Sean Bellafury. Sean.
The 2024 hurricane season was yet another active one, with not only 2 Category 5 hurricanes, but also we almost got all the way through the hurricane name list. Tropical Storm Sarah was the last one that we used this year. Over the past 30 years, it has been a very kind of active set of periods for hurricane landfalls in the United States. From 95 to 2004, there were 20 hurricane landfalls, and then the next decade after that, we only went to 14 hurricanes, but 6 of them happened in 2005 alone. And then from 2015 to 2024, we had 25 hurricanes make landfall in the United States. And even though it was a very active year this year, we actually didn't get the hurricane season going until the latter half of June. Tropical Storm Alberto making landfall across the western, or the eastern rather, coastline of Mexico. The big one of the season, or one of the big ones I should say, Hurricane Beryl becoming the earliest Category 5 storm on record as it moved through the Caribbean. Not only that, but we also had Tropical Storm Chris form at the same time. Beryl making landfall in the Yucatan as a Category 2 storm, then made landfall near Houston as a Category 1 hurricane. And from there, things were quiet for a bit of time until Debbie made landfall as a Category 1 hurricane in August along Florida's Big Bend. Much of August was actually quiet. We actually only had Debbie and Ernesto in what is supposed to be one of the more active parts of the hurricane season. Same thing for the early part of September as well. Not much activity going on out there, but September was the big month for the United States. Francine making landfall as a Category 2 storm in Louisiana. Tropical Depression 8 moving into the Carolinas. Major Hurricane Helene making landfall in Florida and devastating the Appalachian Mountains, parts of the Carolinas. The final hurricane to make landfall in the U.S. was Milton. At least 400 fatalities this hurricane season. It is the second costliest hurricane season with an estimated $220 billion in damages. As I mentioned, Hurricane Beryl, the earliest Category 5 on record, and we had 5 U.S. landfalls, all of them hurricanes. Not only that, but just take a look at how busy the Gulf has been. These are all the major hurricanes to make landfall along the Gulf Coast since 2017.
Thanks, Sean. November 30th also marked the end to meteorological fall for the Northern Hemisphere. Meteorological fall consists of the months of September, October, and November, and it was a record warm 3 months for the lower 48 states. The average fall temperature across the nation was 57.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 4.1 degrees above average, ranking fall of 2024 as the warmest fall in NOAA's 130-year climate record. Now, Maine, Minnesota, Nebraska, Texas, and Wisconsin had their warmest falls on record, with an additional 18 states ranking among the top 3 warmest falls. Additional data is suggesting that when 2024 ends, it will likely be the warmest year on record due to the string of warmer than normal months that have occurred this year. 22 states had their warmest January to November on record as well. Now, for more on how meteorological fall played out right here in Central Texas, we bring in First Alert meteorologist C.D. Finley. C.D.
When we're looking at the last 3 months, of course, September, October, and November of our afternoon average highs, this is typically what we see on a year-to-year basis. We usually average about 91 degrees in September, about 81 degrees in October, and about 69 degrees in November if you round all of those numbers up. How does that actually compare to how we did in 2024? Well, you may notice we're a few ticks above those normal average highs. We had about 2 degrees difference for September, but when you look at October, keep in mind this was the hottest October on record in Central Texas, and we were nearly 9 degrees above the normal average high for that month. We were also above average for November. So how does that kind of pan out when we put it on a year monthly basis look here? Well, we've been above average for the last few months. The last below normal month that we had was July, oddly enough. There wasn't too much variance between June and July, but overall for 2024, pretty warm out there when we're talking about our average monthly highs. And that's just the highs. I mean, compare that to the lows. I mean, the story doesn't really change all that much either. In fact, it looks a little bit more warm when you're looking at the morning lows. We only had 1 month this year that was below normal, and that was even barely below normal, and that was July. So a lot of red up here when it comes to our average monthly lows here in the year of 2024. Now, what can you kind of attribute the warmer temperatures to? Well, you can maybe attribute it to the lack of rainfall as well. I mean, just taking a look here at what we usually see on a month-to-month basis, we usually see somewhere between a little less than 2 inches and a little over 4 inches, depending on which month you look at here in the fall months. And compare that to where we've been the last few months. Well, we have been absolutely bone dry. So keep in mind what the winter outlook said, where we have higher odds of seeing above normal temperatures and below normal precipitation. Reporting in studio, I'm C.D. Finley.
While December 1st marked the start to meteorological winter, astronomical start to winter actually kicks off in less than a week. In just 6 days, on Saturday the 21st at 3:21 in the morning, we officially switch over from fall to winter. That day is also known as the winter solstice, which is the shortest day of the year. But thankfully, after we reach the winter solstice, our days begin to grow longer and longer until we reach the summer solstice in June. So although the winter solstice means the start to winter and colder weather, it also means we start to see more sunlight each day. We're also just 10 days away from Christmas. Now, over the past couple of years, tree farmers have been dealing with the challenging weather conditions across parts of the nation, which impacts Christmas tree growth. Jeff Wagner reports from a Christmas tree farm in Minnesota and has more on what can be done to help keep the Christmas spirit alive when weather makes for challenging growing conditions.
So is there a sort of pride in seeing them still standing tall after some tough weather years?
Yes, absolutely.
It's one of the latest harvests of the year, and the fresh scent these pine and fir trees emit can, in a way, be bittersweet.
The fields that we're harvesting this year have been part of us for 8 years or more, and we've watched them grow up, and now they're going to be cut down.
John Krieger owns Krieger's Christmas Tree Farm in Lake Elmo, and while he finds joy in knowing the evergreens will make a family happy, they might not realize the effort it took to reach these towering heights.
How long does it take on average for a Christmas tree to grow?
It takes about 1 foot per year. So a typical tree we sell is around 8 feet, so it's 7 to 8, sometimes 9 years old.
That's with normal weather conditions. These trees, however, have battled drought conditions for about 4 years, at times on the severe and extreme end of the spectrum.
Across a tree's lifespan, when might drought have the most impact on a tree?
It's definitely the most impactful in the first couple years, at least in terms of survivability.
Trees need water right after planting to establish root systems, then more in the years to follow to fuel growth. They typically add about a foot per year, but only 6 to 8 inches if there's drought.
The tree usually grows in height despite the dryness, and so the height will be there, but just that fullness and density might be a little bit lacking.
About 10 years ago, Krieger says they made changes on the farm that help protect trees from drought.
We'll plant the trees a little bit closer together so they're easier to manage. We also invest a lot in wood chips and spread those amongst the rows so that the ground stays cool, and it also holds the moisture in.
Drip line irrigation was added as well. Krieger says all those changes allow the trees to grow on schedule and to their fullest potential despite what Mother Nature has dealt them, which luckily this spring and summer was a bountiful amount of rain right when moisture is needed most.
Then around about September is when the rain stopped this year, but by then the trees were mostly dormant.
Welcome back to Weather Extra. Since April of 2023, the SpaceX Starship rocket has been launched a total of 6 times, with 4 successful launches and 2 failures. You're seeing video now of the latest launch, which happened back in the middle of November. Starship is the most massive, powerful, and tallest rocket to ever fly. SpaceX has developed a Starship with the intention to transport cargo and crew members to various destinations, including Mars and the Moon and potentially beyond. This rocket is also fully reusable, which one of SpaceX's goals is to lower the cost of launching rockets to outer space. Now, obviously, with Starship being the most powerful rocket in history, you need an extremely powerful engine to lift this thing into outer space. Right here in Central Texas, down in McGregor, they test the exact engine that's used to launch the Starship rocket. And last week, you probably heard and felt these tests a little more than usual. First Alert Chief Meteorologist Brady Taylor joins us now to talk more about why the testing of the engine last week was much louder than normal.
Yeah, Jillian, you know, in Central Texas for the last decade plus, we're pretty used to the rocket tests that go on at the SpaceX facility near McGregor. But on Tuesday, a much different story. There were 2 tests of the Raptor engine. That's what you see over here that they test out at SpaceX. Both tests were rather long. The morning test over 5 minutes, the afternoon test 4 minutes and 42 seconds. But they did absolutely nothing different than any normal test. But we had a difference in the atmosphere that changed and kept those sound waves stuck at the ground and made it where it was extremely louder and traveled for a further distance. So on a little technical side here, this map that I'm showing you here, it's what's called a sounding map. Shows us how the atmosphere is acting as you go higher up in the atmosphere. We get these from weather balloons. So what I want to point out is this red line. So on a typical setup, as you go higher in the atmosphere, it cools off. Well, this line, you see this little nose here. It's what's called an inversion, where some warmer air set on top of cooler air that had moved in with the cold front. That inversion, that cap, that lid held the sound waves down at the ground, making the test louder and lasting for longer and traveling for a further distance. Now, the crazy thing is that was one Raptor engine being tested each time. Imagine these engines are made for the SpaceX Starship. That rocket launch takes 33 Raptor engines. So imagine how loud it would be with that.
There's been a lot of research recently connecting traumatic brain injuries and concussions to the potential of developing dementia later in life. In this week's Degrees of Science, Brady Taylor talked with the leading Alzheimer's and dementia expert about this link and why it's so important to follow doctors' guidelines if you ever do get a concussion. We'll hear from that expert right after the break.
There's been a lot of talk about head injuries and concussions and stuff like that here in recent media. Is there a connection between head injuries that could lead to an increased chance of getting dementia?
You know, this is a very strong connection, and I'm seeing it very much myself. And we know in football and a lot of sports, I've actually authored some papers about traumatic brain injury or concussion that talk about we're getting better and better at diagnosing it and figuring out when someone's had a concussion. But, you know, that kind of damage is cumulative. So we want to protect our brains. We want to keep our heads from getting banged around and traumatized. This is really important. There's different kinds of studies about this, but one thing is clear. Every time there's a traumatic brain injury or a concussion, there's an increase in the risk that the person is going to have dementia or of some kind later in life. And lots of head injury and lots of concussions increases that risk. And even what we call the subconcussive injuries where it's not quite at the level of a concussion, but if you keep doing that, it's very bad for your brain. So wear the helmets, wear the seat belts, do whatever you need to do to protect yourself, because even if the head impact doesn't make an acute symptom that is concerning you, you can have consequences later in life that we don't even fully understand. Some of it is probably because there's little micro bleeding going on, and there's cell death going on, and there's a lot of shock to the whole brain. But it definitely is something that we want to avoid. I think we're all aware of the football players and the chronic traumatic encephalopathy that some of them have, which is, a pretty tragic thing. So we really want to avoid those head injuries and treat our brains like they're delicate and special.
So say somebody does have a concussion, they get diagnosed with it. How important is it to follow through the protocol of recovering and doing what your doctor prescribes to potentially help for that?
I think it can make a big difference in your future. I know it's hard, especially for young people, to project ahead like that they're going to want to have good, healthy brains thinking in 30 years or 40 years, but you really do want to listen to the doctor and do everything that you're told by your healthcare provider. The most important thing is not to let it happen again, like as much as possible to avoid another concussion, and especially, very close in time frame. And to do everything to make sure that you are fully recovered. I mean, it's not just even the issues of the cognition, but you don't want to be saddled with lifetime of headaches, difficulty reading. I mean, a lot of our lives are spent looking at our devices, and concussions can make it really, really hard to concentrate, to absorb information, to stare at screens, like really affect your whole quality of life. So it's very important to do everything you can do to lessen the consequences of any kind of brain trauma that you do have.
So one brain trauma that becomes more of an issue as folks get older is that risk of falling. How important is it to make sure you have a way to keep safe from that, and I guess also a way to inform people if something happens?
Well, this is a big problem with the older population. I mean, falls can lead to a very, very bad prognosis in older people because those not just the head injuries, but, bones break, hips break. We do a lot now to try to help keep people from falling. But, as people get older and they lose balance, it becomes really important to do exercises that keep your trunk strong and that keep your balance. I mean, you can really improve your balance with good physical therapy. Keep active and move the joints and the bones. Keep everything strong and stable so that you don't fall. And there are more and more things available now, technology to alert people if someone has fallen, or to alert if someone who shouldn't be doing it is getting out of bed in the middle of the night, or even to automatically turn lights on when someone gets out of bed, because a lot of falls happen in the night when people are getting up in the dark and they don't look where they're going or they can't see. So I think that technology is one place it can really help. And avoiding falls is very important because the consequences can be so big for some little minor thing that, like, you made a slip that took a fraction of a second.
To find out more about brain health and tips to limit your potential of developing dementia, scan the QR code on your screen to watch the full Degrees of Science conversation on our YouTube page, or you can head over to our website, KWTX.com/Degrees of Science. Weather Extra will be right back. Welcome back to Weather Extra. While we may never experience a long stretch of cold enough temperatures for lakes to freeze here in Central Texas, it's still important to know the safety behind ice thickness in case you ever come across a frozen lake. For more on how frigid temperatures and what's under the surface of these lakes plays a role in ice forming, here's Kirsten Mitchell.
From skating to fishing some days you can't keep them off the hook.
Minnesota's frozen lakes offer 10,000 opportunities.
It's amazing. I mean, this is what we live for. We know it has to be cold for the lakes to finally freeze over, but how cold are we talking?
Lake ice formation starts pretty much when the temperature starts to get below freezing.
Luigi Romolo is a DNR climatologist.
The ice will start to form on the outer edges, on the shores of the lake. We call that shore ice, and then it'll start to grow inward.
With consistently cold temperatures and calm conditions, the ice that forms is clear and smooth. But we know that's not often the case for us here in Minnesota.
The windier it is, the longer it takes for the actual ice cover to form.
Then there's snow.
Snow plays a big factor in ice formation because it acts as an insulator. So when you get snow on an ice cover, it will prevent the ice below it from getting thicker. It can also weight down the ice and cause the ice to crack.
We had a pretty big crack open up east to west.
Lake ice is weakest in areas of flowing water, like streams and under bridges, and close to shore.
Ice thickness can vary even in just a few feet.
Gas holes caused by stream inlets and aquatic vegetation can also weaken ice, and areas near logs, rocks, bridges, and docks can be dicey too. White ice is caused by snow melting on top of the ice and refreezing, but white ice is only half as strong as clear ice because it's filled with air bubbles.
The clearer the ice, the stronger it tends to be.
Ice thickness guidelines should be doubled when traveling on white ice.
My best advice is to always check the thickness of the ice. If you're drilling and you're not all the way through the ice and you're hitting water, that's a good sign that that ice is not safe.
With photojournalist Jose Pascual, Kirsten Mitchell, WCCO News.
Well, that's all we have for you on this week's episode of Weather Extra. We'll see you right back here next weekend.